You're watching the Newshour at 9 and I'm Swati Joshi. It has been 30 hours since the world came crashing down for the occupants of AI171 flight. A day later, the families of those who lost their lives in the deadliest crash in Indian aviation history involving a single aircraft are left picking up pieces and counting their losses. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was in Ahmedabad today, called it an unimaginable tragedy. PM also visited the crash site and the hospital where the injured were being treated. He also met Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, a British national and now the sole survivor from the AI171 aircraft. The man who cannot believe how he became the Destiny's Child.
फोन आया था मेरी बहन को, दीदी का प्लेन क्रैश हो गया कहते, दीदी ने कहते मेरी बहन चली गई है। सुबह 11 बजे से मैं 12 बजे कॉल करी, वीडियो कॉल, मैं उठा ही नहीं पाई दीदी की कॉल।
सिविल में ले जाके भर्ती किया और बहू बच गई है और लड़का चला गया, मेरा लड़का चला गया, मेरे को छोड़ के मेरा लड़का चला गया, मैं उसकी दादी हूँ।
आग लगी और मेरे भाई के ऊपर पड़ गई, मेरा भाई वहाँ के वहाँ जल गया। मेरी मम्मी उसको बचाने गई थी पर मेरी मम्मी को धुआं आ गया तो मेरी मम्मी दौड़ चली, तो मेरा भाई वहाँ जल गया, पूरा सर जल गया उसका।
ये पहले 19 तारीख को लंदन जा रही थी, क्योंकि बेटे का जन्मदिन 16 तारीख का था, तो उन्होंने 12 तारीख की टिकट कराई, 12 तारीख की टिकट कराई और सब ने उनके जाने के पहले सब ने उनको बधाई संदेश दिए। व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप में भी है हमारे पारिवारिक, उसमें भी बधाई दिए, लाइव बात भी हुई सबकी फ़ोन लगा के, और उसके बाद सीधा न्यूज़ चैनल के माध्यम से मालूम पड़ी ये दुखद घटना।
थोड़ा टाइम के लिए तो मेरे को लगा था कि मैं भी मरने वाला हूँ, लेकिन जब मेरी आँख खुल के मैं देखा ना तो मुझे लगा मैं जिंदा हूँ। तो मैंने ट्राई किया, जब मेरी सीट थे वो मेरी बेल्ट निकाला, मैंने वो ट्राई किया जहाँ से निकल सकता वहाँ से, तो मैं निकल गया वहाँ से। मेरे सामने नजरों के सामने एयर होस्टल और दूसरे आंटी अंकल सभी उसमें मिस हो गए थे सभी। फिर भी मेरे पता नहीं मैं कैसे बचा हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे नज़र के सामने ही सब दो एयर होस्टल वो अंकल आंटी सब उधर ही सब।
Well, now, even as multiple agencies are probing the reasons behind the crash, everything we know so far is still in the realm of speculation. Now that the black box has been recovered, a thorough analysis will establish the truth, but that will take weeks, if not months. However, one thing is for sure, the beam of spotlight is firmly on Boeing's checkered past. As per Boeing's own website, they have seen over 2,100 crashes since 1954. And while this might have been the first fatal crash involving Dreamliner, the taint of the past clearly casts a shadow on the aircraft maker.
On how they short-circuited the system to get approvals, etc., etc. We all know it's been in public domain. With regard to Dreamliner, yes, a whistleblower had brought forth certain deficiencies, etc., which were addressed. We all know that in 2012-13, Boeing issued an advisory to ground Dreamliner aircraft till such time that the technical deficiencies are overcome. So Boeing will not have an interest in saying, let me give an aircraft to an airline which is unsafe for flying. It has a bearing on it. And as we all know, that the share prices of Boeing company has also fallen down yesterday post this accident. So which company would want it?
Now that brings us to the legitimate question that we are asking. And the legitimate question tonight is, was the crash that killed 270 people avoidable? Let's open up the debate. Let me introduce the guests. Let's take that question across to them.
You're watching the News Hour at 9. Debate number 1 on Times Now. Super Prime Time.
And tonight we're joined by Bernard Lavelle, aviation expert. We also have Jitendra Bhargava, former executive director of Air India. Mirza Faizan, aerospace scientist and inventor of the ground reality information processing system, and also former Boeing engineer, joins us on the panel as well. Along with Parvez Damania, former executive director, KFA and aviation expert, Devesh Agarwal, aviation expert, Captain Sanjay Karve, also an aviation expert. We have John Gradick, an aviation expert as well on the broadcast. Group Captain Dr. M.J. Augustine Vinod will be joining us as well. I'm given to understand that we will have Group Captain joining us anytime now. Now, before we talk about the speculations that are doing the rounds and the theories that everybody is discussing and analyzing, before we take that up with our panel, let's talk about Boeing's role a little bit here. Here's an excerpt from June 2024, when the then Boeing CEO was grilled by US Senator for falsifying 787 inspection records. We'll discuss this detail as well, about the misplaced priorities that the Senator was talking about the tainted past of Boeing. But before that, let's take a look at the theories that are doing the rounds that everybody is talking about and analyzing based on the video that has come to fore and whatever little information or detail that we know about the crash. This is theory number one, dual engine failure. What happened in those 27 seconds is what we are discussing. Theory number two, incorrect flap configuration. Theory number three, landing gear extended, which you can see here in the visuals and the images that have been captured. Theory number four, the bird strike and loss of power. These are the theories that everybody is talking about, including the weight factor. Was there overloading? That's theory number five that has come to fore, the multiple possibilities that may have led to the fatal crash. Theory number six is about fuel contamination. Can that also be one of the contributing factors, a reason why there was a loss of power or thrust or a problem in the propulsion system? Let's open up these debates and we'll keep on playing the theories here in the background. Let's focus once again on the first theory that we are talking about. Theory number one that talks about dual engine failure. And let me in fact bring in our guests here. Let me go across to Bernard Lavelle. Bernard Lavelle, is that a rare thing to happen with Boeing Dreamliner, which is considered to be uncrashable?
Yeah, it's a rare thing to happen on any commercial aircraft to have two engines fail. The last kind of big incident people will remember for that would be the flight that landed on the Hudson River back in New York a few years ago, where the flight was taking off, but it achieved a much higher altitude than the Air India flight yesterday. And a flock of Canada geese were ingested into both engines. So there was a failure on both engines, and unfortunately, in this occasion, the aircraft was able to land safely on the water. But it's very, very unusual. I mean, modern commercial aircraft, and the 787 in particular, are designed to be able to take off with one engine. If there had been a problem with just the one engine, then perhaps we wouldn't be seeing the sad scenes that we have seen over the last 24 hours. But this looks like potentially both engines went out, which, as I say, is very, very unusual. Not just in the 787, but in commercial aircraft today. It's very unusual to have two engines go out.
Now, before we discuss other theories in detail, let me quickly focus on the aspect, the Boeing aspect, the trouble-tainted past that we were talking about. And let me bring in Jitendra Bhargava. Jitendra Bhargava, is this about the maintenance of the aircraft? Is it about the manufacturing flaw that some whistleblowers are talking about? Is it about the problem in the propulsion system? What is your assessment of whatever you have come across so far in terms of the details of the fatal crash?
You know, it's a fact that there was a whistleblower who pointed out several deficiencies, but that was about a decade ago. Now, what we need to do is to judge these Dreamliner performance based on actual flying in the preceding 10, 12, 15 years, ever since this aircraft was launched. Now, what has been the safety track record of it? Very good. Now, look at it. So we can't really be bringing in a 2013-14 incident and taking it now. And let me give a parallel example here. Boeing had 737 MAX aircraft. After a couple of accidents, fatal accidents, it grounded the aircraft all over the world and then rectified it. And since then, they have been selling this aircraft. Now, if something untoward was to happen to 737 MAX, Will we recall the grounding of the aircraft? Because if that was so, then Boeing has sold this aircraft after rectifying it. Airlines are buying this aircraft or taking delivery of aircraft, knowing fully well it had a bad history, but it's been rectified. So let's not look at the past. I would ideally say Dreamliner aircraft has served Air India well, like it has served very many airlines very well. Now, what do we look at it? We know about it that the accident has taken place. And there could be either a technical issue, and you have, of course, listed out 6 theories here that could possibly be. But let's wait for it. Now that today we have had the development of the black box being recovered, the analysis will begin, the Boeing team arrival, and everybody coming in, getting on to it. Give themselves 6, 7, 10 days time. Let them decode the black box, get to the facts, rather than speculate and say, this is the reason why it is. And government on its part has done a good job, and which is very rare, I must say, that they have issued directions to Air India to conduct additional checks. Now, they may not be necessary, let me explain to you. But what it will contribute is the confidence boosting in the traveling public when they see the Dreamliner aircraft, when they're boarding the aircraft, to say, well, this was the aircraft that crashed on Thursday, and I'm traveling on the same aircraft. So this confidence boosting measure is a very welcome step.
Absolutely. I agree with you that one should not jump to conclusions and one should not be passing judgments at this critical hour. But one would definitely want to understand, because, you know, it has not been heard of before. I want to bring in Mirza Faizan, former Boeing engineer. The uncrashable has crashed, Mirza Faizan, and a lot of people are finding, especially the experts, are finding it difficult at the moment to wrap their heads around what went wrong in the first minute itself, in just 27 seconds. And that's where all these theories come into play. One of them also is about the incorrect flap configuration. What are your views on that?
Swati, first of all, thank you for having me. And a minor correction, I am not a Boeing engineer. Okay. I have worked on the design of the Boeing system, 787, flight management system, primary flight display, multifunction display. But those systems were designed by Honeywell, which is another large aerospace company. So for Honeywell, not for Boeing. So now setting that context. So coming to your questions about the crash of Boeing 787. First of all, as I have always been saying, that this is an aircraft with stellar safety records. The whistleblower, Sam's issues on 787 was on the fasteners. He raised, let us say for a moment that his concern were true. That was about fasteners. Here we see the engine, the issue with the propulsion system. Okay. So I do not want to speculate right now that because of Boeing crumbling, quality standards, there is a crash right now. If there is an issue with the program, if there's an issue with the plane starts acting up the moment they come in service, like 737 MAX did. They do not wait for years and years. I remember there was another plane a couple of decades ago, start crashing up. The moment it came into service. So I will not speculate and say that because of the Boeing's current quality issues, the plane which was made a decade ago, more than a decade ago, started acting up.
All right. In fact, like I said, a lot is being said about the theories that are doing the rounds, people doing assessments on an individual level. So Captain Steve in the video says it's a big if. And I've been speaking to a lot of experts who say, whether it's about lifting, retracting of the gear, of the flaps, it's in the muscle memory of the pilots. And it's going to be a rare thing if it has happened. It's a big if. Let me go across to Devesh Agarwal. Do you agree with that analysis?
Hi, Swati. Thanks for having me. One thing I would just like to quickly correct. Almost everybody is referring to an altitude of 625 or 675 feet. That is actually being derived from the ADS-B data that was on flight radar. The difference is that Ahmedabad Airport is already at a height of about 200 feet. See, that height is from main sea level. And if I recall, the ADS-B data is normalized to 1013 millibars, which is standard altitude, 2992 inches of mercury air pressure. But I'm given to understand, I think that day of yesterday, Ahmedabad was around 1003 or 1005. So that altitude could be as low as about 200 to 300 feet. That is something that we should keep in mind. If you notice, from the time of takeoff to the time a sink begins, it's just about 12 seconds, little more than that. So it's really not that much, number one. If you see the cockpit of a 787, the gear lever is located in the central console, which is right near the thrust levers. And that's the flap lever. The gear lever is located right in the front near the instruments. So in fact, if you see any cockpit video, there are channels on YouTube that show cockpit videos. You see the moment there's a command of gear up, whoever is the pilot monitoring, who has the job to raise the gear, literally has to reach forward like this and raise the gear and then step back. There is no real way a pilot, and even somebody with 1,000 hours on a 787 will definitely know where the flap lever is and where the gear lever is. Also, to operate the flap lever, I think some pilots may be here, they can bear me out. You have to raise the lever and move it, because it sort of has a kind of a locking step, so that it nobody can inadvertently just push it and move the lever. So it requires a very deliberate kind of action it's kind of like how our cars are designed. When we put a car into reverse gear,
Yes.
we sometimes have to raise and lock, or we have to press it down, or there is a very deliberate sort of step added in that to prevent any kind of accidental movement. Now, having said that, just one simple thing. 50 crore passengers have flown on the 787. There are over 1,150 aircraft already delivered and flying. The GE90 engine, from which the Gen X engine is derived, is probably the world's most reliable engine. Okay, it's been in service with the 777, and it has never suffered a dual engine failure. The only 777 that I can recall to suffer a dual engine failure was at Heathrow Airport, the British Airways 777, and that was being powered by the Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engine. And the cause there was because they had flown over the Arctic, ice formed, right. And when planes fly at such high altitude, the temperature is as low as -50 Celsius. So, they have a heat exchanger that kind of warms the fuel before it goes in. Now, the GE90 has not suffered any kind of dual engine failure, at least in my memory. If somebody knows it, I'll be happy to be corrected. Now, you've got such an ultra reliable engine. Number three, we talk about bird hits. The Canada geese is huge. Okay, and still these engines are tested. The Indian, we see that cheel, the kite that we see all around Indian airports. I would say probably 50 of those kites have to go into this engine. The Gen X engine is almost as wide as the whole fuselage of a 737. It's almost 100 and some inches. Okay, that's a big, almost 10 feet wide engine. Those propellers are massive. Right. And you at takeoff thrust, if a bird goes through it, trust me, it will be shredded. But you don't see any kind of smoke. You don't see any kind of debris coming out of the engine.
So, Devesh Agarwal, if I'm not wrong, you are ruling out the bird strike theory. You're ruling out the flap configuration theory. You're also ruling out the dual engine theory. What, according to you, and I know that most of you are going to say, we don't know what went wrong. Let's wait for the black box data to be retrieved and for that to be analyzed. But, what can go wrong in just 27 seconds? The plane takes off after getting all sorts of clearances. And that's why I said, most of us, including the experts, are shocked. Can you put your finger on one thing and say that perhaps?
I'm with every expert here. We are shocked. You, right at the beginning of the show, you asked a very simple question. You said, was this accident avoidable? Every accident is avoidable. Even the ones on the road, we see lakhs of people getting killed every year on Indian roads. Every accident is avoidable, and every accident still occurs. The beauty of the aviation system, though, is that after every accident, you have this multidisciplinary accident investigation team that goes into detail. And the biggest benefit that comes out of there is learning. The reason why aviation is so safe today is that over the last 50, 60 years, every accident has served as a learning to better improve the system.
All right.
The reason those so many procedures, checks, balances, checklists is that to the extent where there have been crashes in the past where pilots have taken off with an incorrect flap configuration. And in those days, it used just be a small audible warning with a lid, which could get missed.
All right, so you're saying it's a tightly controlled environment. It's a tightly controlled environment.
That alert system is a big red screen on the thing so that the pilot instantly knows my plane is not in correct configuration.
Okay. Let me go across to John Gradick on that angle. Do you agree with that? Could there be a sabotage angle? And what do you think about this theory of fuel contamination?
I think it's, one of many theories that we're all discussing around the table right now. Fuel contamination to me is pretty far-fetched because the aircraft did in fact take off. There was full power for takeoff. There was no indication, and the captain would have known if there was a fuel issue on rollout. So there was, to my opinion, there's no really evidence of fuel contamination. However, who knows? We'll have a look at the black box, and the information in the flight data recorder should tell us. The one thing that we should understand is that the crew did call a mayday, and that mayday was done within seconds of liftoff. So the crew knew that the aircraft was in trouble. So whether the flaps were retracted, whether the power was out of balance, or whether the aircraft was, in an abnormal mode, the crew knew seconds after takeoff. And I think that, to me, that sounds like basically, an engine failure for somehow, some way, lack of thrust. It wasn't the flaps. The flaps basically were probably not extended on takeoff, which is an issue. But, that could have possibly be as well. So, there's a lot of things that you have to go right in order to make the aircraft complete its takeoff and gaining altitude. Something did go wrong. They did not have time to retract the landing gear. They did not have time to, in fact, extend the flaps. So flight was very short, and we saw the end result with a loss of 243 people on board the airplane.
Absolutely. Let me, in fact, bring in Pravesh Damani as well. No system is 100% foolproof. There's always 1% chance of error. Having said that, nobody with utmost surety can say what may be the reason behind this. Several lives lost, but yet we don't know what went wrong. But the black box has been recovered. That has not, the fact that it has been recovered from the rooftop, many believe, is a sign that it has not been damaged. Data can be accessed, can be analyzed, and perhaps all these questions can be answered.
You see, the black box gives you about 200 parameters. So since the black box has been found, now it's just a matter of time where we will know the exact situation and what went wrong. Right now, all these theories have assumptions, but every theory has a counter check, which says this did not work out, this could not be possible. Another thing, if you realize that this was only a 12, 13-year-old aircraft, which is nothing in terms of aircraft. The company is owned by Tata, so they must have spared no expense in the quality of maintenance. The plane functioned absolutely well, took off from Delhi. It must have been cleared by the engineers in Delhi, landed in Ahmedabad without a fault. If there was a problem on the way, the pilot would have pointed it out in Ahmedabad. It could have got grounded in Ahmedabad, but Ahmedabad there was no problem. The engineers cleared in Ahmedabad, the pilots cleared in Ahmedabad, and then the problem came into being. So I think we'll just have to wait and watch. Everybody has a theory, but I think today to say that there was a human error when we are saying the flaps these actions were wrong, these levers were not correct, I think that reflects on human error, I think. So I think it's wrong for us to assume that it was some kind of human error.
Right.
And that is why this accident occurred. Let us just wait. Let us see how it goes, and then let's make the assumption on the whole thing.
Absolutely, and that's why, right at the very start I said
a lot of important issues.
Yes. Yes, that's why initially I said this very clearly that, there's no point in jumping to conclusions or passing judgments. But Captain Karve, when 270 people lose their lives in such a tragic manner, and, the aircraft that is described globally as uncrashable crashes right in front of your eyes, there are questions that are bound to be asked.
Absolutely. And especially when it's an aircraft like 787 Dreamliner. And like Mr. Damania said, the aircraft flew from Paris to Delhi. It landed at Delhi at 2 o'clock in the morning. Then it did a Delhi-Ahmedabad leg. And then it was cleared from Ahmedabad to London. Now this aircraft also has something known as a takeoff configuration warning system. That means prior to takeoff, if your configuration is not correct, the aircraft will give you a warning. So eventually the AIB is going to look at as to what was the configuration for which the aircraft was set up. What all of us are commenting or making comments is basically what we are observing visually on the video. Now the incident, pilots have given a mayday call. What it appears is, it is immediately after the V2. After the V2 and between the mayday call, I really don't think there is sufficient time for anyone to raise a flap or raise undercarriage or lower a flap. So it is, and the regulation says that if you have an emergency at V2 or beyond V2, you must continue with takeoff. There is no question of aborting takeoff. Aborting takeoff only comes up at V1 or below V1. So the pilot has unstuck, and then probably something has cropped up, to which he is given a mayday call. And the fact that he is given a mayday call, that means the emergency was serious enough for him to decide that, look, I have a major problem on hand.
Right.
Apparently, it appears that it is loss of thrust or reduction of thrust. Why it has happened, we have to wait for the CBR and DFDR.
Okay.
Like the previous panelist said, we have to rule out fuel contamination because there were 30 odd aircraft which were fueled in Ahmedabad on the same day.
Right.
Why only this particular aircraft has fuel contamination? And there are adequate warning systems within modern aircraft which will warn you that, look, the fuel is not good, the fuel is contaminated.
Right.
There are warning systems available.
That's why, I think that's the reason why they're also shocked, because you have advanced technology, the state-of-the-art facility. When you talk about the Dreamliner, and as I've been, and everybody has been constantly saying that this is the first fatal crash. This was an uncrashable aircraft, and you spoke about the takeoff configuration warning system. And despite all of that, Group Captain Dr. Vinod, what is your assessment of what may have gone wrong? Earlier, you were speaking about loss of lift. What does that mean?
It's a great question. See, up until the point where the aeroplane took off and it gained about 100, 200 feet, it is absolutely a normal takeoff. That is how most Dreamliners take off, or most civilian aeroplanes with passengers takes off. So up until that point, there is nothing unusual to talk about. Look, let's go back to the cockpit. What happens in the cockpit is the pilot not flying, or the pilot monitoring, is itching to tell the pilot flying that positive rate. So say I am pilot monitoring, and I am looking at an arrow which shows up. The moment that arrow shows up, I am waiting with my hand on the gear lever, and I am saying positive rate. The pilot flying says gear up, and I put the gear up. Why do I do that? Because after that, the amount of thrust I will get is hell of a lot, because the gear is creating a lot of drag. And the moment the gear goes up, the gear going up, sound comes up, the aeroplane starts accelerating very fast. At about 100 feet to 120, maybe maximum 150 feet, the autopilot also comes on. The pilot flying wants to engage the autopilot so that he can concentrate on other...
And that cannot happen till the gear is retracted?
No. That cannot happen till the gear is retracted. So up until the point where it is just taken off, it is a normal takeoff. After that, what I see, what is different from any other takeoff is the gear is still down, and probably the flaps have gone up, but the aeroplane is still in the climbing attitude, in the sense it is continuing to fly. And the next aspect I want to bring attention to many people is, see, if this is the aeroplane and this is the nose of the aeroplane, if this is how it is flying, then there is something called the angle of attack, which is very, very low. But if the nose is same, but if the aeroplane is flying like this, then the nose and the flight path, the difference, the angular difference between the nose and the flight path is called the angle of attack. In this case, the angle of attack from about 4 to 5 degrees went to 15 to 17 degrees in no time. And you can see that very clearly in the video that she is wallowing. The aeroplane is doing something like a falling leaf maneuver. It's kind of a pancaking. Now let's demystify quickly a few points that were brought out for the sake of the viewers. See, let's talk about fuel contamination. Fuel contamination, the moment moisture is detected by the fuel trucks or the hydrant refueling system, it stops the refueling immediately. Decades have passed, fuel contamination cases have not come.
Right.
The fuel contamination, aeroplane itself looks at fuel contamination once the pilot. There are filters which filters the water and stuff like that, and also warns the pilot. Out of balance issue, never an issue, because aeroplanes are loaded in zones. The front zone, then you have a huge fuel tank in the center and the rear zone. In the front zone, bags can move about, doesn't matter. Rear zone, bags can move about, doesn't matter, because you're loading in zones. So that is an issue which is sorted out. Third, even if the weight moves about, the flight control or the fly-by-wire takes care of it to a large extent. Because even in flight, if you notice, people move up to the lavatory, come back, people go back, even chit-chat. All that, the flight control compute or the fly-by-wire manages it. And next, talking about the black box itself or the digital flight data recorder. We discussed that yesterday. It was in the tail. Anyone can put up a ladder, bring the flight data recorder.
And despite the multiple checks and the warning systems on board, I want to bring in Bernard Lavelle on this particular point. Did you notice anything unusual? Because then you have a section of experts who are analyzing the video over and over again, many of them pointing out how the aircraft was still on the path of takeoff, I beg your pardon, and there was no deviation at all. Then there are some who believe that something looked unusual. There was something amiss. Which side of the argument are you on?
Yeah, I mean, I was analysing the video yesterday for another organisation, and to me it looked like a fairly standard takeoff. The aircraft seemed to be at full thrust. It went past its kind of no-go decision on V1 speed, and it seemed to take off. Then the problems started, as explained by some of your other guests here, where the aircraft stopped climbing, it flattened out, and then obviously crashed. But what I think is interesting is that we've gone through a number of different theories here, and to be fair, most of these theories sound very plausible, whether it could be contamination, whether it could be pilot error due to flaps. They all sound very feasible, but we don't know. And of course, it's really, really important we find out, as someone explained earlier, aviation is safe because we learn from all the mistakes that have taken place in the past. And of course, the families will want to know what happened to their
So you're saying nothing unusual about the takeoff, everything looks fine, then you have the warning systems, multiple checks and clearances, everything happens, but the reality, but the truth is that crash landing happened. The truth is that 270 people lost their lives. How did that happen? Why did that happen? Perhaps now only the black box can answer those questions, and we'll have to wait for that data to be retrieved, for that data to be analyzed, and perhaps it will also answer questions on what was happening in the cockpit. The conversation between the crew members, the conversation between the pilots, why was that mayday call given, what went wrong? Now, we also asked a question, did a survey, and this is the response of people. AI171 crash. Do you feel Boeing is hiding something? 75% people have voted yes, 14% people have voted no, while 11% people believe they can't say anything about it at the moment. Like I said, these questions will only be answered now by the black box itself. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the broadcast. Thank you for your time.